Late in the summer of 2014, a body was found by a dog walker in the grounds of St Margaret's Church in Barking. The body was that of 22-year-old Gabriel Cavari, also known as Gabriel Klein. Just 3 weeks later, another body was found. It was 21-year-old Daniel Whitworth, who was found by the very same dog walker in the very same spot in the churchyard. Both men were gay, both had died of GHB overdoses, and both were found in the same position, propped up against the churchyard wall, their t-shirts lifted up to expose their stomachs. Less than a year later, the body of a third man, 25-year-old Jack Taylor, was found. He was propped up on the other side of the churchyard wall, his t-shirt lifted up, his midriff exposed. He too had died from a GHB overdose. This is Stephen Port. He was convicted in 2016 of the murder, rape and poisoning of these 3 young men. He was sentenced to life in prison with a whole life order. He will never be released. It's a tragic, sickening story about a vile murderer and young, innocent victims. It's also, though, one about police failure, because Gabriel Cavari, Daniel Whitworth and Jack Taylor were not the first young men killed by Stephen Port. In June 2014, Port had raped and murdered Anthony Walgate. He was aged 23. After killing Walgate, he dumped his body outside his flat, propped up against the wall with his belly exposed. After he dumped the body, he made this call to 999.
Emergency ambulance. What's the address of the emergency?
There's Cook Street. There's a young boy. Looks like he's collapsed outside. I don't know.
Outside of which number?
4758.
Sorry?
4758, I think.
47 Cook Street.
Yeah.
What area?
Barking.
Okay.
He looks like he's collapsed or had a seizure or something. He's always just drunk.
That claim that he had merely found the young boy outside was a lie. And after repeatedly changing his story, the police arrested Port for perverting the course of justice. They never opened a murder investigation after the deaths of Cavari and Whitworth. That was despite the urging of friends and family. The details of these later cases make that oversight on the part of the police almost unbelievable, and there were multiple clues as to what was actually happening. Daniel Whitworth, Port's third victim, was found with what purported to be a suicide note. It read, "I am sorry to everyone, mainly my family, but I can't go on anymore. I took the life of my friend Gabriel Klein. We was just having some fun at a mate's place and I got carried away and gave him another shot of G. I didn't notice while we was having sex that he had stopped breathing. I tried everything to get him to breathe again, but it was too late. It was an accident, but I blame myself for what happened and I didn't tell my family I went out. I know I would go to prison if I go to the police, and I can't do that to my family, and at least this way I can at least be with Gabriel again. I hope he will forgive me." The note finished by saying, "By the way, please do not blame the guy I was with last night. We only had sex, then I left. He knows nothing of what I have done. I have taken what G I have left with sleeping pills, so if it does kill me, it's what I deserve. Feeling dizzy now, as took 10 minutes ago, so hoping you understand my writing." The guy he was with the night before was his killer, Stephen Port, and it was Port who wrote this fake suicide note, which was intended to absolve him of not one, but 2 murders. The police accepted it at face value. Whitworth's parents, for their part, never believed that the handwriting was that of their son. This didn't stop a Met police officer from claiming at an earlier inquest that his father had confirmed it. It later turned out that rather than consulting handwriting experts, as the police had promised, they simply compared the note to Whitworth's diary entries. Any discrepancies were put down to Whitworth being in a strange state of mind when he wrote it. Even worse, Ricky Wormsley, who's Whitworth's partner, was not even allowed to see the note because being Whitworth's partner was not enough to make him next of kin.
I did ask if I could see the letter myself, but the response I got was, "Sorry, you're next of kin, so we can't show." Yeah, I believe it's a mixture of everything. So So a bit of laziness, incompetence, lack of training, but I absolutely stand by that they were being homophobic towards these 4 victims and making general assumptions that they're all young gay men who take drugs, and they also, I believe, just looked at that letter and just took it at face value.
If Walmsley had been able to see that note and recognise it as a fake, it seems likely that the life of Port's final victim, Jack Taylor, could have been saved. However, even after Taylor's death, the police initially refused to open a murder investigation. After these 4 deaths in the same neighbourhood and in the same suspicious circumstances, it was only after the family of the final victim drew a connection between the 4 victims that the police were forced into action. After initially dismissing their approaches, it was a month after Taylor's death that his family convinced the police to publish this CCTV image of Taylor and Port walking together on the night of his death. Almost immediately, someone in the force recognised Port as known to them. The case was passed to the homicide team, and 2 days later, 16 months after he took his first victim, Port was arrested for murder. Every detail of this story just gets more and more shocking. 3 young men died because the police wouldn't do the job they're paid to do. And we have to ask, what made this possible? Well, the families of Port's victims are clear. This is the sister of Jack Taylor.
We was worried, are the police doing their job? Why haven't they been in contact with us? We had absolutely no support whatsoever because they made assumptions of what had happened to Jack. They just thought he had taken drugs, he had overdosed, there was nothing suspicious there.
Stephen Port took Jack's life and was able to take Jack's life, because that's the long and short of it. He was able to. He was allowed to, because they could have caught him way before. If they'd looked into anything at all, then they could have saved other lives.
Last Friday, an inquest into the deaths of Port's victims came to a close. The jury judged that astounding police failings probably contributed to the murders of the last 3 victims. The coroner, however, ruled that the jury could not make a judgment about whether the investigation was blighted by homophobia. The Met apparently fought tooth and nail to keep that issue out. The spokesman for the families had this to say.
We are incensed by the police's successful attempts to prevent the jury from examining whether prejudice played any part in the police's actions. The coroner did not rule that the police were not homophobic, and our position remains unchanged. Based on the treatment we received, our firmly held belief is that the Metropolitan Police's actions were, in part, driven by homophobia.
Helen Ball, Assistant Commissioner for the Met, denied that the countless errors in the investigation had anything at all to do with homophobia.
I don't think the Met is institutionally homophobic, and I don't think that my colleagues are homophobic as well. I don't think that that has been an issue in these investigations. It was a range of different mistakes, leads that weren't followed, curiosity that perhaps wasn't quite there, things that weren't tied up and understood to be contributing.
The excuses there, curiosity that wasn't quite there, things that weren't tied up and understood to be contributing.
You've got to start, I think, from quite what might seem counterintuitive, which is that the job of the police is not to solve crimes. That might seem counterintuitive. The job of the police, historically, the reason why they were created was to maintain public order. And that is an argument you can find made, repeatedly in some pretty good scholarship on the matter. And if you look at actually the number of cases solved in the UK, I think now it's abysmally low. It's terrifyingly low. But even if it's high watermark, I think in the early 2010s, because you had all this investment from New Labour, I think only about 15% of reported crimes were solved. Reported crimes. Now it's about 7.5%, I think. But that isn't really their job. Their job is to act as a certain kind of bureaucracy to process things quickly. And there's a reason why crimes that happen, often violent crimes, and you get nothing more than a crime reference number. And yet when there's a protest, you see dozens, if not hundreds of police somewhere, because public order is that raison d'etre. And I think we do need as a society a broader conversation around what their role is. And I think, sadly, too many people have been taken in by the kind of media spectacle of crime dramas and Netflix series. That isn't really the bread and butter of what policing looks like. And this is really horrific. I mean, this is really horrific. Not even I thought it was this brazenly bad. Of course, we see it repeatedly in regards to race. And we've seen it with the Sarah Everard case and others with regards to gender violence against women. You can go back to the mid-1990s, 1997, of course, with Stephen Lawrence. Substantively, I don't think that much has changed. In terms of accountability and saying, you're not doing your job, you're not serving the public like you should, and means to recourse and doing something about it, and proper scrutiny, and the default of both political parties to the police, even under Jeremy Corbyn, and the media coverage, terrifying, absolutely terrifying. This is an organisation, let's talk about the London Metropolitan Police Service, which has billions of pounds in its budget, has extraordinary authority over people's lives, is answerable to the Home Secretary, and yet there doesn't seem like basic mechanisms of accountability and scrutiny when it comes to things like this, when it comes to whether or not they uphold the values which as a society we care about. You'd think that's quite important. And the thing is, no politician wants to touch it. It's a hot potato because they see the cost as being too high. You don't start a political fight with the police. You don't call them out on things because you don't come out of that the winner.
I assume it's a mixture of two things going on here, which is one, as you say, the police aren't actually very good at investigating crime. Like this is just incompetence after incompetence after incompetence. The other, I think, the prejudice. I mean, I presume there's some homophobia. I believe the partner of one of the victims, when he says that he would have been treated differently if they were in a heterosexual relationship, that seems entirely plausible to me. I think probably, the overarching story of what's going on here is that the police didn't think that these victims were real victims. They didn't really think that they were worth investigating, and that was potentially partly because they were gay. I think it was probably a lot to do with that they had overdosed. Well, they hadn't overdosed on drugs, they'd been poisoned with drugs, but the police just read it as, oh, these are just gay guys who have chemsex, they take dangerous drugs. It would be a waste of police time, essentially, for us to investigate this properly. So we're just going to push it over there. Loads of people fit into that category. Drug takers, sex workers, people who are homeless, people from certain ethnic backgrounds, people who the police don't think it's their job to serve. Even if they, I think they serve, almost everyone quite poorly. But these are the people they don't even bother at all. And that just seems like what has happened over and over again in this situation, which is they've just not felt like this is a job they need to do. And it seems pretty clear that 3 young men died as a result. The police knew that he had called 999 and lied. He had called 999 and said, I found this guy unconscious in the street. Actually, he dragged that guy out of his own room. That's the point when the flag should have been raised. On his computer, there were all sorts of search terms which should have led them to recognize that there was a bigger story going on here. So some of the search terms which were on his computer: sleeping boy, unconscious boys, drugged and raped, taking date rape drug, gay teen knocked out raped, guy raped and tortured young nude boy. These searches were all made the day before he killed his first victim. The police, they seized his computer, they didn't bother looking. If they had, I presume, they would have drawn the connection and the 3 young men would not have been killed. 3 young lives would have been saved. This is also not just a story about police failure, it's a story about police failing to investigate themselves, because there actually has already been a watchdog investigation into this case. It was completed in August 2018. Their full findings haven't been published yet, but in their summary, they write this. We and the Metropolitan Police Service agree that officers did not have a case to answer for misconduct or gross misconduct. We also agreed that the performance of 9 officers fell below the standard required, and they will need to undergo measures to ensure performance is improved. So essentially, no one did anything that wrong, but maybe we could send some of them on a training program. And despite that recognition of at least some failures, the Belfast Times reports that none of the 17 officers involved were disciplined, and 7 were even promoted. So the IOPC, they didn't get any justice whatsoever. Basically, it sounds to me like it was a whitewash. As I say, the whole thing hasn't been published. It's only once you get a jury investigation that the any of the truth starts to come out. Even then, what they can consider is limited by what the judge will allow them to consider. They're not allowed to consider institutional homophobia. Do you see any route, Aaron, by which the Metropolitan Police changes? If not this, what?
Change for the Metropolitan Police Service would have to come out of something which looks like or resembles an existential threat. Now, how does the police respond to an existential threat? Well, we know. They have more than 70 press officers, the Metropolitan Police Service, and they bombard journalists with a political line. They lobby them to cover certain stories, to not cover certain stories, to conceal certain data. What would happen with the political establishment? Well, they wouldn't say much. And if they did attack the police, the force of the tabloid media, the print media on them would be extraordinary. So we do have this complex in this country, this nexus of power between billionaire oligarch media, between ultimately a frightened political class, at best, even the good ones, between a hugely well-resourced organisation, which is the Metropolitan Police Service. Other ones, of course, Greater Manchester Police, West Midlands Police, Yorkshire Police, etc. But the London Met is a huge organisation. And like I say, by virtue of what would have to happen, their response is fight. It's not flight, it's fight. You look at the Duggan event, for instance, Mark Duggan killed by the police. You have riots as a response to that. Now, the instinct from the media and the political class and the Met was to say this was just tens of thousands of people randomly decided to get violent, and there were no deeper economic grievances. There were no deeper grievances with policing more generally. You see it in the early 80s with riots in Brixton and Toxteth. Yeah, some people start talking about community policing. Oh, it's not like it used to be. I'm sure it isn't like it used to be, right? In terms of people getting the shit kicked out of them for doing nothing. I'm sure it happens far less than it used to. Well, we know it happens far less than it used to. And you hear about some of the stories, for instance, in regards to, I think there was a police station in Dalston in the 80s, a special branch, Scotland Yard, and how they were dealing with sort of political activists in the 70s and the 80s. Things have changed, methods have changed. But no, I don't think they will ever face accountability. Accountability and scrutiny for the London Metropolitan Police Service and other police forces looks like a threat. And that's the problem here. That's the problem. So you can't have growth or constructive criticism or progress. Even somebody like Stephen Lawrence's parents, Michael. Stephen Lawrence, huge police failings. Everybody admits it. Even then, notwithstanding, the Lawrence family were monitored by undercover police officers for years afterwards. Christopher Alder, Janet Alder, his sister, pressed for justice for her brother Christopher, another Black Briton. I think she once said in an event I spoke alongside her, she said, I think they discovered, 16, 17 plainclothes officers had infiltrated her at some point during her life, whether it was activist meetings or, whatever, trying to monitor what she was doing, because she was trying to get justice for her brother, Christopher Alder. People are entitled to Google that name if they want to know more about his case. So no, we won't. We won't, because they see scrutiny as a threat, and they're aided and abetted by the media and politicians in this country. We might see change in somewhere like Scotland or Wales, because things are done a bit differently. But in terms of the centre, the British state, London reaching out, no chance.